Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation,
Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. Our guest this week is someone that I'm sure you know. Bernard-Henri Lévy, public intellectual, philosopher, author, activist, a frontline spokesman for many of the great human rights and humanitarian causes of the world and of the Jewish people. Most recently, the author of Israel Alone. Bernard, welcome to Defending Israel.
Thank you. Thank you.
May we begin with your latest book, Israel Alone. I'm interested in what the response has been so far to the book, and particularly whether you feel you've been able to change anyone's mind. Has anyone actually written or said to you, you know, I had never thought of it this way when considering Israel. You've opened my eyes.
Thanks a lot. The last experience I had of changing or not minds is very recent. I am just finishing 2 days ago a campus tour. I went on a tour in 14 campuses in American universities, from UCLA to Columbia, from USC to the state of Ohio University, and so on. 14 campuses in 11 days. And I had some of the discussions were hard. A lot were friendly with Jewish students who just felt encouraged maybe by my topics and by my arguments, but some of these meetings were conflictual with students who did not always agree with me. And maybe I'm presumptuous, but I feel that sometimes I convinced. I think that sometimes I did shake some preconceived ideas that some students of some campuses could have about Israel. Bad preconceived ideas, wrong preconceived ideas. My feeling is that my book and the way I introduced the book helped to shake these convictions.
And in these 14 campus visits, did you also have an opportunity to meet with faculty? Because very often in discussions about Israel, it's the faculty that is the central challenge on the campuses.
I know. Of course, I met with faculties. A lot of them who feel overwhelmed by the wave of anti-Semitism, who, in spite of their great knowledge, don't always know how to react to this harassment, this intimidation, this humiliation which they have to stand. There is something very strange going on in some of your universities, like Red Guards climate, though it is not Red Guards, it is Hamas supporters, which is honestly not better and maybe worse than the Red Guards of the 1960. So, of course, I met some. They are wise, they are learned, they are great academics, they are full of knowledge, willing to transmit, and they have in front of them a wall, sometimes a wall of stupidness, of ignorance, of violence, when they have to face some pro-Hamas groups with keffiyeh, with Ku Klux Klan Cagoule, and with no reasoning except from the river to the sea, Palestine will be submitted, not free.
So after these 14 visits, maybe it was enough exposure. Did it make you more or less optimistic about what the future holds?
Both. To be honest, I underestimated the extent of this anti-Semitic wave in America, in the campuses. For me, America is a dream. America is a home for all Jews in the world. I often say that I, as a Jew and as a French, would not have been born without America. And I always thought, as a philosopher, that the shining city upon the hill, the American exceptionalism, has to do with the idea of building a sort of new Jerusalem. So for me, no place was as friendly with Jews than the US. I discovered sometimes, and in many places, the opposite, which is, again, crowds, maybe minorities, but nevertheless crowds who really hate Israel, hate Jews, want to intimidate the Jewish students and the regular teachers who just want to teach the truth. So there is something that is really makes me anxious and upset about America. On the other side, when I had some meetings with anti-Hamas girls and boys, students, Jewish often, but not only Jewish, big crowds came, and without shyness, with proud heart, and they gathered and they came in the last days in Columbia, in Princeton, in Harvard. I had a great Shabbat dinner in the law school of Harvard with hundreds of militant students who said no to the woke culture, anti-culture, by the way, no to the woke no culture, no to the anti-Semitic wave, and let's move on, democracy. And they were really numerous and full heart, you know.
And by the way, for JBS viewers, just one translation here. When Bernard says militant, in American terms, it would be activist.
Activist. I'm sorry.
Right. No.
All my militants and say activist. That's my terrible broken English.
Not at all. To the contrary.
Activist.
You're in a unique position now to compare the situation in the United States to the situation in France. On French campuses, beginning in Paris, the elite schools, the more public universities, is there anything comparable to what you saw? Is the situation better, worse, or simply different?
Honestly, it is the same. The whole West is all of the Western values and democratic values in the whole West are under attack. It is true in France, and it is true in America, and it is true in, as you know, in Amsterdam. You had recently this event, which occurred in Amsterdam, but alas, which could have occurred and which could still occur anywhere else, which was the pogrom of Jewish supporters of an Israeli club, planned and implemented by anti-Semite activists and criminals. And it was a real pogrom in the middle of the city of Anne Frank, of Spinoza, of Rembrandt, the most magnificent painter of Bible, of Torah scenes. It happened in Amsterdam. And I must say that it could happen anywhere else. I don't want to I cross fingers.
You jumped ahead to where I was going next, but your first chapter in the book is called Pogrom.
Mm-hmm.
The mayor of Amsterdam the other day very defiantly said this was not a pogrom. She rejected the definition of what happened in Amsterdam as a pogrom. You insist it was a pogrom. Why?
Because when you hunt Jews, when you beat them, unless they say, they scream, unless they cry, "I'm not a Jew," it's a pogrom. It's exactly without the death, thanks God, because at the end of the day, the police at the end intervene, but it is not very different from what happened in the beginning of the 20th century or end of the 19th century in some of the shtetl and villages and ghettos of Eastern Europe. Really, they did. It was a manhunt directed at Jews. The only way to be spared was to say, no, please, I'm not a Jew. How can you call that except a pogrom?
So there are those who have tried to focus on who the perpetrators were. They've emphasized they were largely from immigrant backgrounds. Some have been even more specific. This seems to run contrary to the French notion of trying to avoid discussing religious or ethnic affiliations in public. Where do you fall on the spectrum of how relevant is it to identify who the perpetrators were and focus specifically on them?
Of course you have to identify, but do you think it's a matter of religion? I'm not sure. I don't think.
I'm asking you.
No. It's not a matter of religion. It's a matter of hatred and of politics. And the question you have to ask yourself and to ask ourselves is, who did it and who ignited it? Who inflamed the spirits? Who on television, on social networks and so on, did put the fire in the minds and in the brains? And this has nothing to do, those who put fire in the brains have nothing to do neither with religion nor with immigrants. They are regular Dutch, having a political agenda. They could be regular French, having a terrible fascist but French agenda, and so on. So we have to say who is who, of course. If it is the migrants who did this manhunt, we have to say it is a migrant. But we should not stop the analysis there. Behind the migrants, you have a political activism. You have a political agitation. You have a political plan with some political aims, which is to destroy democracy, to weaken the Western values, maybe to defend the interests of some foreign countries. We are in a sort of, we have entered since a few years in a sort of World War III, with the democracies on one side, plus all those in the world who want democratic values, and on the other side, some big countries like Iran, like Russia, like one NATO country, which is Turkey. Turkey is one of the real issues of our time. On one side, it is a powerful NATO country, and on the other side, enemy of the West, hater of America, hater of the Jews, the first country to have raised a voice in favor of Hamas on October 7 or 8, Erdogan, with a keffieh and praising October 7 as an act of resistance and of an act of liberation, this is a nod which will have to be unnodded, which will have to be cut in a way or in another. Serious concern. And Bernard, we are in the middle of that.
Bernard, many of us believe that if there was a Pfizer vaccine, so to speak, or Moderna vaccine against anti-Semitism, it was the strength of post-war liberal democracy and liberal democratic values. Am I wrong in saying that the center of liberal democratic society has weakened, that the extremes, the far right, the far left, have filled some of those vacuums, and we're now seeing a struggle for reestablishing the center of gravity of liberal democracy, and Jews also hang in the balance? Is that a fair analysis or not?
Correct. It's a perfect analysis. We are facing this situation for the situation you describe. You are describing now for the third time in 1 century. First time was end of 19th century, before World War I. In France, at the time of the Dreyfus affair, you had the same. You had liberal values under attack from the two sides. Then you had the second crisis of the liberal consciousness, which was in the 30s. Democracy was declared dead or dying. No one was still believing in democratic values. Everyone was joining one of the extremes, the Stalinist on one side, the Nazi on the other side. And we are living at this very moment the third crisis of the liberal and democratic consciousness. And the center, as you say, is shrinking, is less and less willing to afford with pride its values. It's a question of pride, pride of the creed. Are we still proud of our creed? American creed, which has been the building stone, the core stone of America. French creed, our form of universalism, which has been again and which is still, in a way, one of the pillars of Europe. Are we still holding the pillars? Are we still holding firm the stone? I'm not sure. And if we don't do it, why should the others, those who believe in autocracy, Turkey, Iran, Russia, Chinese, Qatar, why would they believe in this creed if even us, we don't defend them?
So it's a much longer discussion, obviously, and perhaps more books to come around it. But in a nutshell, what's the answer? I mean, the description of the problem is easier than the prescription for the problem. How do we restart liberal democracy, restart the center, rebuild confidence in our own value system with all of these forces from all sides?
Emergency. In emergency, help Israel to win. Help Ukraine to win. Not to resist, to win. Resist is not enough. I hear these last days that we have to help Ukraine to resist the aggression of Russia. No. We have to help Ukraine to win a full victory. We have to help to hope and to make possible that Putin capitulates. On the other side, it's not only the right of Israel to exist. A lot of people say, yes, Israel has a right to exist. Of course, that's the minimum. Israel has the right, the duty, and we have the duty to help Israel to win completely 100% against Hezbollah, the remnants of Hamas, Houthi, Shia militias in Syria and in Iraq, and finally, ultimately, Iran and Russia. Don't forget, there is an article in the last days in the Wall Street Journal reminding what we all know, what we know, that a lot of the weapons which are found now in the compounds of the Hezbollah have as their origin not Iran.
Russia.
Yeah. Okay? So the link is done. It's a global war. Ukraine and Israel are on the front line, and we have to help them to win, to thank them to battle. They are the boots on the ground, Ukrainians and Israelis, the boots on the ground of all those who in the West and in the world believe in democracy and in liberal values.
Well, we will see whether there is a Western consensus beginning next year on Ukraine, but let me focus on Israel. The title of your book, to remind viewers, and I hope you'll all purchase the book, especially after hearing this interview, is Israel Alone. Is Israel, in fact, destined to be alone in this struggle on the front lines against the forces you described?
For the moment, honestly, Israel has been alone. When I compare with the war against ISIS in Mosul, or the war against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, America against Al-Qaeda had a big coalition with them. Honestly, they were big America, but big coalition. France in Mosul, when we retaliated against the Bataclan terrorist act, we had a big coalition around us. And nobody even thought to ask us French or you Americans, stop, don't go too far, compromise, negotiate, ceasefire. Today, Israel does exactly the same against Hamas. It is not Al-Qaeda, it is not ISIS, it is Hamas, but they are cousins. And suddenly, honestly, who fights with them? Who is in the ground? Who is in the air? And what do we hear from the allies of Israel? They are allies, but what do they ask Israel? Don't escalate, make a ceasefire, don't enter into Rafah, negotiate, not only for the hostage, which would be legitimate, but negotiate in order to stop the bloodshed.
To de-escalate.
Yeah, and de-escalate. The allies of Israel never asked Hezbollah to de-escalate since October 8, 2023, when Hezbollah attacked on a daily basis Israel. I never heard a demand to Hezbollah to de-escalate. When Israel decides to retaliate, the first word coming from America and from France is to say, Israel, be careful with escalation, de-escalate. No, this is not the way an alliance works.
But Bernard, to our viewers, explain why. Why the difference? I mean, the simple response for many will be, it's anti-Semitism. Is it anti-Semitism?
Part of it is surely anti-Semitism, for sure. And part of it is that 75 years later, after the creation of Israel, Israel remains a half-legitimate state. The question of the existence of Israel is still, there are so many people who are still believing that Israel has been stolen from Arabs, from a Palestinian nation, that there is a sort of original sin in the creation of Israel. A lot of people whom I know who are not bad people, I'm not bad, I mean, you can explain them. They really believe that of course Israel, but original crime, original sin. Israel was created as one of the last Western colonies, which is so stupid. Israel was made by native Israelis, half of them. Half of those who built Israel were native, indigenous, half. And the other half, far from being colonial envoys of an imperial Europe, were really the rubbish of Europe, which the Europe of that time did not want any longer. And they were rejected by Europe, go away, go to hell. And the hell was considered as being Israel. So this half native, half rejected as refugees, this does not make a colonial country at all. But if you ask around you, you will find that this préjugé, this preconceived idea, is still very living, and it explains a lot of this shyness in front of the way Israel waged this war.
And even as many of us believe, I think you believe and I believe, that the war Israel is fighting is a war not just for Israel, but is the front line of the war for Western civilization, that Iran and Hezbollah pose a threat to Europe and to the United States every bit as much. Even so,
even so, yes, even so, plus a category of mind which I thought was reserved to Europe, the Munich spirit. You know, Munich,
yes,
agreement
of course,
of Munich,
the appeasement.
Appeasement. We thought that Munich spirit was a speciality of Europe, was reserved to us. Alas, really, I don't. I smile, but I should not. There is also an American Municism. There is also an American appeasement. So, if you put all of that together, you finish with a Western world that does not defend any longer its values, which does not extend any longer a brotherly hand to those who long for these values in the rest of the world, who abandon their own allies, as we did in Kurdistan, Syrian Kurdistan and Iraqi Kurdistan. We, you, American, us, European, we abandoned them, really our best allies, except Israel, who are the Kurds. What did we do with them?
I couldn't agree more. And I would add, and perhaps Israel has shown much larger and more powerful countries how you can fight an aggressor successfully. Whereas other countries said, no, there's risk, World War III, escalation. Mm-hmm. Israel took on Osirak in Iraq, which France had helped build. It took on the reactor in Syria, which the Americans refused to touch. And now it takes on our common enemies. But Bernard, we have just a moment or two left. I'm going to ask you a big question. It's an unfair question, but nonetheless. You have said in your book that today in the world that's unfolded, Jews are not safe anywhere. Is there a future for the Jews of Europe in light of what we've seen? And if so, what's the cause for that confidence?
There has to be a future. It's impossible otherwise. Jews contributed so much in the building of Europe. We have been such a big part in the building of the best of Europe. It would be a crime, a fault, a crime, a sorrow to leave the ground to those illiterate, violent morons who dream to expel the Jews from Europe. We made the big part of the culture. We made a part of the European democratic social contract in Europe. We were part of the Enlightenment in Europe. Jews were so crucial in the best of Europe, and you want them to leave the ground and to leave it to these anti-Semitic gangs and mobs. It would be an absurd world, and I refuse that with all my soul and strength.
And I totally understand and agree, and only hope that political leadership in Europe and the United States will defend the common values and not, to use your word, succumb to a Municism, another word for appeasement, that ultimately abandons the Jewish people. On that note, Bernard, I regret our time is up because I'm just warming up with one of the world's great intellectuals and one of the Jewish people's biggest treasures. But I do want to thank you, and to JBS viewers, I urge you to buy Bernard-Henri Lévy's latest book, Israel Alone, and on the subject, an earlier book, The Genius of Judaism. Look it up, buy it, and remember this interview. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. This is David Harris, Defending Israel.
JBS is made possible by viewers like you. This high holiday season, as a thank you for your tax-deductible support of our programming, you can request a signed copy of David Harris's new book, On the Front Lines. Simply visit our website for details. We thank you for your kind support.